So we are starting now. Organizations are implementing remote work as a necessary step to continue their day-to-day operation. All our lives have been impacted, and we understand that it is challenging to juggle multiple responsibilities during this time when boundaries of work life and home life are blurred. This trend of remote work is likely to become the new normal, requiring most of us to adapt to changes needed while providing an opportunity to increase innovation and efficiency. With this, I welcome all of you to the webinar on Align Yourself to the Publication Process, an initiative by Elsevier in collaboration with HEC Pakistan. Now, we all know that the entire world is going through a very tough situation. The COVID-19, which has been termed as a pandemic by WHO, is gripping entire world. Every country is being affected. Now there are several pictures that go around the internet, and this picture really tells a very important story. It re-emphasizes on the fact that science, education, and research are the pillars of building any progressive nation. So what did Elsevier do to ensure that these things are strengthened? At Elsevier, we recognize the potential for scientists to find new answers, reshape human knowledge, and tackle the most urgent global crisis like the one we are in today. We are all doing what we can to support each other in these adverse times. Elsevier had proactively launched its COVID-19 Information Center on January 27th and populated it with over 20,000 articles and additional content from our experts. The goal of this website was to open whatever resources we have to help public health authorities, researchers, and clinicians that are working to contain and manage this disease. We've continually provided updated resources on Elsevier content and experts. Our resources span scientific and medical journals, textbooks, educational products, a new R&D tool that we have created, an interactive global map of experts based on Scopus data. We also participated in the Education Continuity License from the Copyright Clearance Center, allowing use of publishers' materials in distance learning models and at no cost to the end user. Elsevier is now enabling full text and data mining of this growing body of knowledge through channels like NIH PubMed Central and the WHO database for free. This site that you see is approaching a million visitors, and there have been 25 million downloads from this platform, a million alone from Lancet articles. And to follow this up, Elsevier conducted a global webinar on 30th March. The topics that were covered in this particular webinar was talking about infectious diseases and their research on their outbreaks, and then how research was conducted to uncover the impact and trends, right, by providing practical examples from tools like Scopus and Scival. This webinar set a new record for Elsevier. We had over 21,000 registrations and over 14,000 online attendees from all across the globe. More than 167 countries. We had participants from more than 167 countries. And the participants were spread from researchers, doctors, nurses, media, data scientists, librarians, industry, and many more. Many Elsevier journals are fast-tracking research on the coronavirus. One example that you see on your screen is the Journal of Critical Care. And several open access journals like Hardware X, they are inviting articles for COVID-19 equipment designs. And basically, they are going to ensure that articles published in this special issue will be free to publish and free to read. On your screens now, you can see some more examples of journals that have called for coronavirus research and are fast-tracking research on this particular topic. And we have journals in almost every subject category inviting applications. As you all know, life sciences and clinical researchers around the globe work non-stop to develop a vaccine and treatment to end this pandemic. Last Tuesday, we took another step to accelerate research efforts by launching the Elsevier Coronavirus Research Hub. Now, this is really interesting for researchers working in this particular domain. because the Coronavirus Research Hub offers a broad collection of biomedical, clinical, and life sciences resources along with solutions to the global life science and clinical research community at no extra cost. For the next 6 months, academic, government, non-for-profit, and commercial researchers can access this information for free. Researchers working on vaccine, drug development, clinical research will receive priority access to the Coronavirus Research Hub. Our team will continue to work on developing this platform and increase its capacities and capability. Via this platform, you have access to tools like Clinical Key, Embase, SSRN, Pure, Mendeley, Mendeley Data, Text Mining, Science Direct, Professional Services, Pathway Studio, Veridata EDC, and React. Right. So coming to our topic of the webinar, we first start by understanding researchers' needs, understanding your needs. So for a researcher like you, there are two very important keywords. One is information and second is knowledge. Now, there is a very thin line that separates information from knowledge. That thin line is called peer review. When you type anything on Google, you get lots of information. But is that knowledge? Is that something you can trust? Is that something you can cite? That's the big question. And the answer to that is peer review. Now, the main purpose of research is to inform action, to prove a theory, and contribute to the developing knowledge in a field or study. Innovation is about taking these inventions to the marketplace by providing opportunities for economic and social development. Every researcher like you today is striving hard to find opportunities to innovate and contribute to both himself or herself and these efforts are bringing a very significant change to your needs. Today's researchers like you are more demanding than ever and look for citing impactful work, evaluate their own impact, find collaborators, manage research data, and much, much more. And hence, you look for tools that can help you achieve this and improve research effectiveness. Now, if you look at the research workflow, on your screens now, you can see a very rough schematic of the research work. Now, it may mean different to all different kinds of scientists working in different subjects. For example, for a laboratory scientist, it basically starts with finding funding opportunities, understanding a topic, then finally going into the research design, collecting literature for literature review, doing the experiments, finding the results, and then finally writing a paper and then showcasing it, right? And I think this particular process remains same throughout the subject areas with a few exceptions. But if we simplify the research workflow, it looks something like this, which is common to all subject areas. What we wish to highlight on this particular tab is that Elsevier products form part of this entire research workflow. We have solutions to help researchers at every stage, which means we strive hard to ensure that we hold the hands of the researchers whenever required. Researchers can always come back to us and take help from these particular tools. And the key concept behind developing any tool in Elsevier is research centricity. Now let us understand how scientific publishing actually started. Documented first publication of scientific journal was in 1665 and it was called Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. Surprised to know that this journal still exists as part A and part B. Now, this particular journal, when published in 1665, still had the three most important parts that every journal should have. First was registration and archiving, which meant that this journal will be registered and all the contents in this journal will be archived for future use. The second important part was dissemination, which meant that articles published in this journal will be disseminated across the world to help the research community use this information and do something better. And the third and probably the most important is peer review, which meant that the article's quality will be judged by a group of experts, subject experts, who will ensure that the scientific quality of this journal is maintained. Now, if you look at scientific publishing nowadays, there are more than 5,500 scientific journal publishers. 40% of all the journals are covered under four major uh, uh, companies like Elsevier, Springer Nature, Wiley, and Taylor and Francis. More than 35,000 peer-reviewed scholarly journals are published every year, which is contributed by more than 40,000 unique authors who have written close to 26 lakh articles. And this number is not stagnant. It keeps on increasing at an average of 3% every year. So let us first understand how a journal is organized, what forms part of a journal. So a journal majorly comprises of four parts: the people who are behind this journal, the aims and scope of a journal, the quality aspect, and the open access option. So when we talk about people, I think the most important person in a journal is the editor. And on your screens, you can see editors' roles, right? Now, I would tell you that the editor's main role is to ensure scientific quality, is to ensure that the impact factor of the journal increases year on year, right? He's the person who coordinates the entire peer review process, right? And who also defines the aims and scope of a journal, which are very important for authors, right? And he's usually a senior professor, a renowned professor, and there are often a team of editors. So you have chief editor, assistant editors, and so on. Then there is an advisory board, right? So the members of the advisory board are usually appointed by the publisher and the editor, right? And they are usually experts in the subdomains of that particular subject matter. They may or may not be involved in the review process, but their primary responsibility is to ensure the future direction of where a journal should go. What are the future topics that the journal should publish in? And I think this will come as a surprise to many that when I say publisher, I don't mean Elsevier or any other publisher. I mean a person. So for every journal, there is a publisher. Now, this person's responsibility is to ensure the proper management of the entire journal. He is the one who appoints the editor, who creates the entire editorial infrastructure. So there are a lot of editors in this particular call and a lot of reviewers. So you might be aware of the structure, the software or the platform that is provided for you to provide feedback. So the publisher is the person who actually creates this entire infrastructure. He is also responsible for distribution and promotion of the published articles, to ensure the typesetting of the articles, ethical and copyright issues, and basically appointing the editors and the editorial board. Now again, aims and scope of a journal are very important because that is going to define the audience of this particular. Understanding the audience is very important because when you write an article and you target the right audience, that will ensure readership. When it ensures readership, there are more chances of getting citations, which is the ultimate goal for every researcher. Now, the aims and scope also defines the complete subject, the details about the article, type of articles that it is going to publish, whether only review articles or original articles or conference papers, etc. It also talks about the quality aspect. Sometimes it also talks about the publication speed or what time is taken to get an article published, and whether a journal is associated with any group or society or not. On your screens now, you are going to see a sample of aims and scope for a journal called Tetrahedron, which is a very renowned journal. And you can see how every particular paragraph explains one particular topic. Next, I think one of the most important parts that we cover under journals is quality. And as you know, there are several indicators that are available to measure the quality. But the most popular and the most used by everyone is the impact factor. And let me tell you, since I have been sending invitations to all of you, I've been receiving a lot of emails asking about impact factor and a lot of things. So I decided to put up a slide to help you understand how impact factor is actually calculated. So if I wish to calculate the impact factor of a journal in 2019, I would take all the articles published in that journal in the last 2 years, that is 17 and 18. So just to bring to your notice, impact factor is calculated for either 2 years or 5 years, right? So on your screens, you can see the 2-year impact factor calculation. So in the denominator, I will take all articles published in the last 2 years, that is 17 and 18. In the numerator, I will take all the citations received by that journal for those articles in the current year. That will give me the impact factor of any journal. However, the calculation is not exactly like it looks on your screen. So if I say 10 divided by 2 is 5, and if I do the same calculation for impact factor may be either 5.2 or 4.7, but it is usually not 5, because there are a lot of internal calculations and factor that influence impact factor. Now, there are a few facts that you need to know. First, all journals do not have impact factor, right? I think all of you are aware about this. Then conference proceedings are not considered for impact factor. Impact factor is usually biased towards fast-moving subjects like medicine, which has higher citations, so higher impact factors, and subjects like mathematics, which have lower citations and lower impact factor. And some very good upcoming journals do not have impact factor. So it becomes very difficult for researchers to assess the quality of any journal. Now, there is a need for alternative metrics. So to help researchers out, Elsevier took out a new metric which was called CiteScore in 2007. The difference between impact factor and CiteScore is CiteScore takes a 3-year window, first of all. Second of all, it includes all article types. And any journal that has been published for at least 3 years will have a CiteScore. That means you have access to metrics which you can now compare like for like and understand and assess which journals are better. Apart from that, there are a lot of alternative metrics that you can see. So metrics I've already discussed about CiteScore, but there are metrics like SNIP, which is source normalized impact per paper. I've received a lot of questions about alternative metrics also. So SNIP is basically helping you to assess journals, mostly interdisciplinary journals, right? So the example that I gave you earlier, that any journal publishing content on medicine, the top journal in the field of medicine will have very high impact factor, sometimes of the order of 50, 60, or even more, right? But if I take a slow moving field, like usually in case of social sciences and mathematics, right, the impact factor is usually low. And that is where it creates a disparity. So if I take the top journal in mathematics, let's say the impact factor of that would be 5, right? And if I take a 5 impact factor in the field of medicine, that is usually considered as a average journal, right? Again, this is a generic statement. So I'm just trying to compare like for like. Top journal in mathematics and an average journal in medicine both have the same impact factors. And if somebody asks you which journal is better, you have no answer to give very specifically. So what do? We have this matrix called SNIP, which is source normalized impact per paper. So what this basically does is it normalizes the subject area and then gives you a number that tells you how good a journal is, right? So SNIP is used usually for comparing interdisciplinary journals or journals from different subject categories. Now, next type of journal is called Scimago journal ranking, right? This type of ranking system is called this is usually a prestige metric. So when I talk about prestige, what I mean is what are the source of these citations that the journal is getting. So prestige or reputation may be calculated in a lot of ways. So one such way of calculating a prestige is by Scimago journal ranking. So let's say, again, I'll take an example to help you understand. Let's take 2 journals. One journal gets heavily cited from top universities across the world, Oxford, the Harvards, and Yale, and then talk about NASA. So that journal gets heavily cited from top institutions across the globe. And then there is another journal that has received the same number of citations, but the source of the citations are not as impactful as the other journal. So again, this is a very generic statement, but it gives you an idea of how reputed a journal is, right? So this is what Cymago calculates, and it gives you SJR. Now, why is there a need for alternative metrics like SJR, SNIP site score? Is simply because we can never judge any journal based on just one criteria. Imagine judging people based on only one characteristics, right? Or all of us in this room, we have good qualities, we may have bad qualities. If somebody starts judging us only on our bad qualities, then it is not right. Similarly, whenever you judge journals, when you qualify journals, you need to look at the journal from every angle. And this is why these alt metrics are very important, and they are going to help you throughout your research career. Another issue that usually comes up is about open access. And I think there is a lot of confusion around open access, and that is why I have this slide here. Most of the journals that are published today are subscription journals. That means they are purchased by the library, the university, the consortium, and are only accessible to the subscribers, right? But there are a different type of journals which are called open access, and these are open for everyone to read. But to publish in these journals, the authors need to pay an APC charge. Once they pay that, the article becomes free for everyone else to read. Now, open access is of two major types. One is gold open access, and another is green open access. So what I discussed earlier, where the authors need to pay an APC charge to make the articles freely available, those type of journals are called gold open access, which means as soon as the APC charge is paid, the article becomes immediately free for everyone else to read. Now, the green open access model is a little different, and authors have the flexibility to choose this option. So in the green open access model, the authors do not need to pay any fee upfront, right? So what happens if you choose to publish by this route? You are basically, your article will be kept as a subscription article for a particular period of time. That means it will remain under embargo period for, let's say, 6 months to 2 years, depends on every journal's guideline. So once that period is over, you are free to host your full text of your article on any public open repositories and share full text, right? That means your article becomes open access after that embargo period. Let me tell you, all Elsevier journals, and I repeat, all Elsevier journals offer you the option to take the green open access. Now, if we compare article level metrics, we already have metrics to compare journals. But what about articles? If I ask you difference between or which article is better than the other, I think we have one metric, which is number of citations that we always follow. Now, number of citations may not always give you a clear understanding of how good that article is, how impactful that article is. For that, there is another term which is often used, and you also might have heard when Mr. Saurabh was speaking, that the FWCI of Pakistan is 1.08, which means that the quality of publications in Pakistan is above world average. So world average is considered to be 1, and yours is 1.08, which means the quality of articles is 8% above world average. If it was below 1, it would be below world average, right? So this field-mated citation impacts are available on the Scopus platform for all the articles, and you can compare like with like. An article may have lesser number of citations, but may be more impactful, right? Just take the example of any article published in the field of any significant article published in the field of coronavirus today. Don't you think it has a lot of impact than a similar article on coronavirus that would have been written, let's say, 10 years back? So this is why we say citations, again, are not the only way you can measure the quality of articles, but you need to look at the impact also. And then there are some metrics called Plumex metrics, which measure the social media impact of any journal. Now, social media today plays a very important role. Most of you would be on Twitter, LinkedIn, ResearchGate, Mendeley, Facebook. So all these platforms, they cover a lot of information and about that particular article. Wikipedia, news mentions, online blogs. So Plumex Metrics basically covers all this under one umbrella and gives you the entire social media impact of any paper. So we've learned about I would say the journal metrics, the article metrics. Now let's come to author metrics, right? So again, for authors, I think one important metrics is the H index. Now what I've done, I've respectfully taken the example of Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Chaudhry, who's one of the leading scientists in Pakistan. And what I've tried to do is, on the left-hand side, you can see the Scopus H index, which is 54. And on the right-hand side, you can see the Google Scholar H index, which is 69. Now, researchers are often confused which one is appropriate, which one should be used. So the first answer to this question is, it is your choice, right? You are free to use either of them, but which one is considered to be more authentic is a separate question. Now, if we look at how Google Scholar calculates H index, so first let us understand what is there in Google Scholar. So Google Scholar not only covers journals, but academic websites, preprints, thesis, and a lot of information that is great. It also includes books from the Google Books project, and results are often duplicates of the same article, either preprints or postprints, due to the wide range of sources. So since the number of articles is more, which is not absolutely correct, it gives a heightened H index. So if you go to any institute, and again I say it is totally your perspective on which one you choose, but I would tell you leading institutes, they ask for Scopus H index. So coming to the editorial process. Now this is really something very important, because once we understand what the editors need, I think it becomes very easy for the researchers to plan their research and write accordingly. So when I talk about editorial process, it looks something like this, right? So on your screens, you see a schematic diagram of the publishing workflow. And you see there is a start button. So that is where you submit an article to any journal. Now, the first place that the article goes is to the editor. Now, once it goes to the editor has to take a decision very quickly, because we must understand editors of good journals, top high impact factor journals, top quality journals, they receive multiple entries every day. And then it becomes very difficult for them to sort them out, because they have to assess the scientific quality, to either reject it or forward it to the reviewers for further review. So now the editors, they have usually set a benchmark in their mind, and they know what they are looking at. So whenever they get an article, they read an article, what do they look at? They look at whether an article is scientifically correct or not. They look at whether the article is reporting something new or something significant. And then the article is of interest to the audience or the readers. Now, it is not possible that every time an article reports something new, right? It could be a theoretical paper, mostly in the fields of social sciences, right? But it should report something significant, something that has a social or an economic impact, right? Now, audience is very important, as I discussed earlier, because if you target the right audience, if you publish in the correct journal that is a target for the right audience, your article will tend to get more readership. And we've already discussed more readership, more chances of getting cited. But then the editor has also decided a few things, right, which they consider to reject a paper. Now, again, this is based on our discussion with our own editors, and this is a summary of what we've collected. So first thing is topic of research, not trending, not impactful. So what do you do when you read a paper first? First thing, what did you see? You see the topic or the heading. Now, it is always said that the most important part of your research should be in the heading. So once he sees the heading and he understands that this topic is not of interest, he may not want to read it further, right? Next step, what do you see after heading? Is the abstract, right? So now for him, abstract is very important. And this is where he's going to invest his maximum time on reading the abstract, understanding the entire gist. Now, if the abstract has a lot of language errors and is not written properly, there are too many grammatical mistakes, the editor usually loses interest. And if he loses interest, he might not want to forward it to the reviewers, right? So we must ensure that the language errors are avoided. We are going to discuss about this in detail later on. Then poor geographical distributions of citation. That means, let's say you are writing an article about a local problem in your region in Pakistan. And if you are only citing articles from your own area and your own country, it tells the editor that you have not done enough research. You're not citing global articles. So that is also important. The editor would want to see how well read you are. Have you cited articles from every section or not? Every part of the world or not? And then he would also want to see, have you cited the recent research and the oldest research? So talk about backfiles, right? Backfiles are very important, because to do a literature review, you need to have the complete length and breadth of any article, any topic, right? So on Science Direct, you will have articles dating back to 1800s, right? So you can actually see those articles and you can understand historically what has happened in that particular field, which enables you to get to cite articles from the earliest stages till the recent article, right? And then the editor will also want to see whether you've cited the top scientists in those fields and top journal articles. Now, editors usually have access to a lot of tools like Scopus and other tools, which can give them this information immediately. So they are much more advanced and they have much more advanced tools to assess these kind of criteria. Now, once the editor agrees to forward it to the reviewers, it is assigned to the reviewers with a proper structural framework and a feedback form. Now, the reviewers, they take their own time. A lot of you have this question: how fast a journal publishes, what is the publication time? Now, see, everything is dependent on mostly the reviewers. So reviewers will take their own time to ensure the scientific quality. Once they have read the entire paper, they will send their recommendations to the editor, right? The editor will collect it. Now, the editor has the final say. Usually, reviewers are odd numbered. That means you will have either 3 or 5 or 7 reviewers, right? So that is because the editor wants to have a consensus, yes or no. Now, if there is a confusion, then the editor has the complete authority to accept or reject a paper. So he is the veto power. So he will either accept it or reject it, or if there are suggestions from the reviewers that, it's a good article, if these changes are made, I think this article can do really well, then these changes are suggested to the author. The author has to incorporate that in its paper and again resubmit to the journal for its next stage of evaluation. So now that we've understood that what editors want, let us align ourselves on how to develop a manuscript. So developing a manuscript involves 7 stages. First stage is thinking before writing, choosing the right journal and article type, using the right process to write a paper, language, ensuring that the paper is up to date and in the right context, choosing the correct article structure, and being prepared for common questions by reviewers and editors. We'll take them up one by one. So thinking before writing, what does thinking mean? We all think, right? But you have to think of the criticality of the most important points. So don't think as an author, right? Think as a reader, what the reader wants to read. What can the reader derive from your particular article? So you need to be very clear. Your article should be very easy to read. Often we try to make articles very fancy by using fancy terms, but we should never overdo it, because as I said, the article should be easy to read. Only then it will attract your audience. Of course, scientific words and the most important words should be incorporated, but the language should be. So what can you do while you are thinking? So first, write down the central message of your research. What do you want to convey to your audience? Summarize your entire research in 1 sentence, 1 or 2 sentences, right? And why is that? Because what we usually say is, if you do that, you can very clearly specify what is the novelty of your work, right? Because that will be incorporated into the most important sentences. right? Now, there is something called elevator pitch. If there are people from the marketing background in this call, they in this webinar, they would understand this elevator pitch. So elevator pitch usually means that you meet somebody up in an elevator and you have only 2 minutes and you need to convince him for an appointment or convince him on a topic. So what do you say in 2 minutes to that person so that he's convinced? That is called an elevator pitch. So it is always recommended that you summarize your entire research in a few sentences and try explaining this to people around you, to your friends, to your family members, and see if they are able to understand what you are trying to convey. Because if they can understand, the editors and the reviewers, they are subject experts. They can very easily understand your paper. And then it involves two parts. First is reading the guide for authors. I think I will repeat this many times during my presentation, but reading the guide for authors is something which is of prime importance. All of you should read the guide for authors, not once, not twice, as many times as you can. Because this guide for authors will give you the complete details about layout and section, nomenclature and abbreviations, reference format, types of figures and tables and number of figures and tables, statistics and guidelines to submission. So you have everything in guide for authors. Every journal will have a guide for authors in its homepage. So go and read the guide for authors. Next is choosing the right journal. I think this is something which is a burning question in every researcher's career. Which journal should I read? Where should I publish? Now, we can give you simple tips on understanding how you can choose a correct journal. So we must understand that a very common reasons for editors to reject an article is because the article does not fall in the aims and scope of the journal, right? And we discussed how important aims and scope and guide for authors is. So before you submit to a journal, you need to make sure and you need to ensure that the paper is attractive enough for the editor and the readers, right? And how can you select the right journals? First of all, by understanding the aims and scope of the journal. So your topic does not fall beyond the aims and scope. What type of articles does that journal include? Well, who is the audience who is going to read those articles? And what are the recently published papers in that journal? Because that gives you an idea of what is the current focus of that journal, right? And one way of choosing journals on the for your interest in the Elsevier for the Elsevier journals is by this finder, journal finder, this tool called journalfinder.elsevier.com. So if you go to this particular tool, this by simply inserting your title, abstract, and selecting the appropriate field of research, you can get important information about which are the journals, Elsevier journals, that is of the same interest as your particular article. What is the acceptance rate, the open access options, journal insights, and all these things, which will really help you in understanding which journal is more appropriate for your own research. On our tool called Scopus, there is a separate tool where you can actually compare up to 10 journals on one single platform and assess which journal is better. So it is always said, you always choose the right journals to read also. Because there is a famous saying which says, if you read quality, you publish quality. And that's where access to Science Direct is so important for HEC member institutes, because Science Direct is the Elsevier's leading platform of peer-reviewed scholarly literature, and it provides high-quality answers to improve research performance. Using the right process to write a paper. Now, the right process to write a paper, again, very subjective. What we are trying to show you is the overall skeleton and how you can design your article. So first is collecting the elements of the paper, which is creating an outline of your entire research. So write down your central message, the questions that need to be answered, preparing draft versions of your plots, figures, summarizing your main findings, and selecting references. This is your first stage, right? And when you write your first draft, do not worry about grammatical mistakes or whether there is coherence between two sentences just try and write down everything that you can recall about that particular research. Write down everything. Don't edit in the first draft, right? And don't worry about the language quality as well. And once you have written your draft, then you read it as a critical reader, right? So you read it as a reader and you try to see whatever points you have put down, is your message clear? Are the readers, or will the readers be able to understand what you're trying? And then what you do is, then you do your editing, and this is where you rewrite and you improve your article structures. Now what you need to do, you need to revise everything, put everything in order. Okay, ensure that there is coherence between two sentences. One sentence leads to the other sentence and there is a meaningful connection between the two. If there is anything that has been written more than once, redundant text, you need to delete it, right? Write short sentences, right? Don't write too long sentences, because then again, as I said, the essence of the article should not be lost, right? And then once you finish writing, do take feedback from your co-workers or seniors or colleagues, because they are the first reviewers of your article, right? So take feedback from them, see what you can improve. And when I talk about language, I think that we have a separate slide on language, because this is one of the major reasons of any article being rejected. If the article has been written in poor English or poor grammatical, there are grammatical mistakes. Of course, I'm talking about English journals that publish in English language, right? And it is always advised that editors usually say, and they understand that English is not everyone's first language, right? So if that is the case, we need to take help. We need to ensure that our article is perfect, written correctly, and then you can actually make it a lot impressive and easy for the editors and reviewers to read your paper and understand it very well. And here on your screens, there are a few suggestions on what you can do to improve the language. So write short and direct sentences, convey one piece of information in one line, right? Avoid multiple statements, and it is always advised that average length of sentences in scientific writing is only usually 12 to 17 words, right? So don't make your article, the sentence length, too long, right? Then if you have used any abbreviations like I.E or your abbreviation of an institute or a university, please explain it clearly, right? Use present tense for known facts and hypotheses, and past tense for all the experiments done and all the results, right? If you can ensure all these things, you are good to go. And here are a few examples of how you can reduce the length of your sentence. So a number of can be written as several, fewer in number can be written just as fewer, right? It is clear that, clearly. So you can use all these, and there are many more that can actually help you in reducing the length of your sentence. And I've said this in my slide on what editors want. So please ensure that the paper is up to date and in the right context. That means your work is not an isolated piece of research. It should have some connection with the past, right? Or with the future. It is not something that probably will not create any social or an economic impact, right? And of course, as I said, it should build upon earlier work. So there should be something that has been done before. Based on that, we can do something new. Then we need to very clearly say what is known and what is yet to be known. And then you need to clearly determine what you are trying to uncover, right? And you should also mention if there are any still unanswered questions that are still remaining to be answered after your research, right? Now, in a reference list, the editor and the reviewer, they want to look at recent articles, top journals, leading scientists, self-citations. So do not, I would not say don't self-cite. You may self-cite, but do not self-cite irrelevantly. Because if the editor sees irrelevant self-citations, that is a major turn-off for any editor, because that also comes under ethical issues, right? So please ensure all these things in your reference list. Now, if you look at the correct article structure, again, this is a very generalized article structure that I'm going to show you. So let's say we talk about the title, followed by authors, abstract, and let's say in title, as I already said, that the title should include your main finding, your major finding. Then comes author. So you need to clearly mention who's the first author, who's the corresponding author, co-authors, etc. Abstract. So as I told you, abstract is one of the most important parts. So make sure that it is easy to understand, written in the right context, and there are no grammatical mistakes. Then comes keywords. So you need to choose the keywords very strategically to ensure that they are searchable in ANI databases and use only established abbreviations. For example, DNA. So we all know that there is an established abbreviation for DNA. Use these ones which are more commonly used. And again, check guide for authors clearly. Please read the guide for authors. Then comes your introduction. And here is where you're going to do the entire literature review. You need to tell the audience why you did this research. You need to convince the readers that your work is really useful, right? It clearly addresses what is the problem. Is there an existing solution? Why is it not the best? And why are you suggesting that this one is the best? What is the main limitation? And what do you plan to achieve from this particular article? And then the methods that have been used. So again, describe how the problem was studied. So the entire method of doing this research needs to be put down in black and white, including, let's say, in case of laboratory scientists, you need to also mention which equipment you have used, which make, which model, right? Everything needs to be in black and white. Why? Because this method section is going to ensure that is your work reproducible or not. So a reviewer may want to reproduce your work and see whether this is reproducible or not, right? So that is why you need to give every detail about the method of research. Then talking about results and discussions, why do you find, what did you find, and why do you think it is so important that it was needed to report in this paper? And you include all the data, including figures, tables, videos, or any other information that you have. And then conclusion. Now, conclusion has to be very short and clear. It should justify your entire research, right? And it should give the concluding remarks and also suggest future experiments. So a paper should not just end by addressing a problem, giving a solution, but it should end with other possible research that can be done. So every article should lead to another invention or another article. It should encourage others to write articles. Then acknowledgement. So people who helped you in research, the advisors, financial supporters. So here is where you mention the funding agency's name, proofreaders, supply of materials, right? Suppliers. Then you mention the references. I think we are having a separate section on references, which is the second session that I'm going to take on Mendeley. And there we are going to help you out with using Mendeley and how using Mendeley you can automatically create citations and make your bibliographies by a click of a button. And then if there is any supplement information, so we all should know every journal has limitations to number of tables, number of words, or to type of information that you can provide. So let's say there is a calculation sheet or a PPT of your particular research, and you wish to submit it. So you can submit it as a supplement information. On Science Direct, if you go and search for articles, on the left hand side, you're going to see a lot of supplement material in forms of tables, videos, and much more. And you can simply download them and use it in your own right. And then be prepared for common questions from reviewers. So reviewers, they are very analytical, right? So they would want you to basically comment on the importance, validity, and of your conclusions, right? They would also want to see whether that topic is in line with the journal requirements. The introduction is clear, well balanced. Are the experiments correct? So there they are going to look in methods and if they can be repeated or not, right? If the quality of the tables, articles, pictures are not good, again, that is something which actually comes, it is very noticeable if the quality of a picture is not good. And if the quality is very good, again, this also helps you in further getting acknowledgement from the reviewers, right? And then are the results well presented and analyzed? So they're also going to look at the references, as I said earlier. So the reviewers will have a few questions in mind. If you can just ensure that you have already answered all these questions on your screen, you have basically done 50% of the reviewer's job, right? So it, again, if you can make the reviewers and editors happy, reduce their workload, it is going to help you in getting their acknowledgement. Of course, quality is something which is of prime importance and the basic. So what I'm saying, all these suggestions go beyond quality. Next, now that you have learned that how you can plan your article and make it very structured, the next important point that comes is submitting a manuscript, and then what you can do to ensure smooth submission and approvals. So this is your opportunity to convince the editor that why they should publish your article. So you should take that opportunity, and you should always write a good cover letter. Now, cover letters are very important because you cannot mention everything in a journal article. So whatever information is equally important but is left out, you can mention in the cover letter. So you can describe why this article is will make that journal special, right? So you need to comment on the importance of your article, why the editor should publish this article, and if there are any requirements from the reviewers that have been mentioned in the guide for authors, you need to comply to that, and you need to mention that you have already complied to all these points, right? There is a checklist which you need to fill up. You describe about yourself, so you mention a few lines about yourself, your track record, your research area, describe your research field, right? And then what are the main findings of your research, significance of this research, relevance to the journal, and then you may also suggest good reviewers from your end. Now, it's totally the editor's choice to accept those reviewers or a few of them from your list, or totally reject them and use some other reviewers which he has in mind. But you can always give your suggestions, and there is a reason why. Because sometimes for particular topics or particular subject area, it is very difficult to find good reviewers. Again, if you can make the editor's life easy by suggesting good top scientists in those particular field who can be reviewers, it makes the job of an editor a lot easier. And it also ensures that your paper is not delayed, because if there is no reviewer assigned quickly, the paper will take more time to get published, right? So always give your suggestions in form of a cover letter. Now on your screen, you can see a sample cover letter, right? So the sample cover letter, as I said, apart from the earlier points, you can see final approval from all the authors. So the co-author, corresponding author, and other authors who are involved, their approval should be in place so that all of them agree. And see, they have mentioned suggested reviewers on your screen also. So that is something, and that is how you're going to write a review letter, a cover letter. Now, cover letter may not be, you might be thinking that, who will read the cover letter? Sometimes the reviewers, they would first look at the cover letter to get a background of the entire research and the entire article, because that makes it easier for them to assess the importance of this particular article. So again, as I said, make life of editors and reviewers easy. That will help you in the long run. Now, the editor has the final call of either accepting a paper, rejecting a paper, or giving feedback to the author to improve a paper, right? And if such feedback comes, you should ensure that you note down all the points, respond to each point, and mention it again in the cover letter that these were the suggestions given, what you have done to improve your article. If there is a comment on the reproducibility of your results, then you must do additional experiments to prove the same. And once you have done that, you can again design the cover letter and include all these details there and resubmit your article to the journal. Having done this, a very major part that is covered and that is very important is publication ethics. Now, there's a very famous saying which says it's a wise to trust all and equally wise to trust none, which means that you cannot trust everybody. but that doesn't mean that everybody is not doing the correct things, right? So you should be very careful. So what this sentence means to say is, choose your next step very carefully and assess everything, look at everything from all different angles. So we should always obey publication ethics, right? So what do I mean by publication ethics? If you know, there is a website called www.publicationethics.org, which is specified by COPE. COPE stands for Committee on Publication Ethics, and they are the people who lay down the ground rules of to maintain integrity and trustworthiness of scientific work and the way it is reported, right? So again, it's a forum for editors and peer-reviewed journals to discuss all aspects of publication ethics, and they would also advise on how to handle people who have misconducted or have been found to misconduct, right? And again, on the Elsevier platform, you will see a website which is www.elsevier.com/publication ethics, where you can find general publication ethics that needs to be complied with for all authors. And in the guide for authors, for every journal, you will get very specific publication ethics that are very specific to that journal. So do read the guide for authors again. And you must have noticed that during your submission process, you are often asked to confirm a few declarations. So that is taken as a consent that you have obeyed or you have followed all publication ethics and not done any misconduct, right? Now, if any misconduct is detected, what happens, right? So misconduct can include a lot of things like data fabrication and falsification. So data fabrication is basically making up data. So there is no data that you've got, you've just made something up and then you have reported it. That is called data fabrication. Then there is data falsification, which means manipulating the data. So you have got some results and you have changed it to suit or comply with your flow of your article. That is called data falsification, and they are considered to be unethical publishing behaviors. And then we talk about plagiarism. And again, plagiarism is a topic that can take even one day to understand. But we must understand what is the basic of plagiarism. So plagiarism is basically appropriation of somebody else's ideas without giving them proper credit. So let's say you have taken a piece of information from an article and you have not credited the author. That is called plagiarism, right? That is why we have citations. That is why we give references. So we must not forget to give due credit to the person who is the owner of that information or who has registered that information. Serious offense could lead to rejection of papers, academic charges, termination of employment, and it usually brings a very bad name, right? Again, few of the other examples of unethical behavior is submission to multiple journals, right? And you should always submit to one journal first and then wait for the answer of that journal and then go to the next journal, right? And then improper author contribution. So basically leaving out authors who should have been mentioned and including authors that have not contributed. So all these things, they come under publication ethics. Now, what happens if a misconduct is detected, right? So as I said, it could lead to a lot of things, but if a paper is retracted from the journal, it doesn't mean that the paper is removed. So it means that the paper remains there forever and it looks something like this. This actually brings a lot of bad name to the author, right? So always ensure retracted paper will remain online and it will continuously remind all the readers that there was misconduct that was detected in this particular article and these were the authors involved. So following publication ethics is of utmost importance. Next is, right, you have done everything correctly and now you are ready with your paper. You have submitted it to the editor. You have followed all the instructions and now your article is accepted for publication. Do you think your job ends there? I think it actually starts there. Now, is there any product in the market that is successful without marketing? Even big brands like Apple, etc., they need to market their own products. They have advertisements, hoardings here and there, television advertisements. Why? Because promotion is very important. There needs to be a brand recall. There needs to be continuous reminders that yes, this is there and this is something that you can consider. So promoting your article is really important because each year more than 2.5 million articles are published. How do you ensure that your article is noticed and your article stands out, right? And there is much that editors and publishers can do. So we have a platform. Let's say you publish in an Elsevier journal. It is hosted on Science Direct, which is one of the most used platforms globally, and it has close to 1/5 of the world's data, right? That is the first step. When you publish in a good journal with a good publisher, your article is ensured that people globally are reading that, getting access to that. But what you can do at your end is even more powerful. You have the power of social media, right? You have Twitter, Facebook, Google Scholar, Mendeley, LinkedIn, ResearchGate. There are so many platforms where you can simply paste a link of your article and just say, please read, this is my recent article on so and so. To read this article, click here. Done. That one simple share can attract so many clicks, and then there may be increased readership and viewership, which can ultimately result in citations. And I say ultimately may result in citations because quality is of utmost important. If I give you an article for free, which is not good, would you want to read it or cite it? Probably no. So please ensure that you publish a paper, you promote it, and ensure that the quality is justified. So before we go, one important thing for all researchers in this room, every one of you should have an ORC ID. And this ORC ID is very important. And I'll tell you why. So all of us have names, and in these names, we can abbreviate our names in a lot of different ways. For example, my name is Vishal Gupta. My name can be written as Vishal Gupta, Gupta Vishal, V Gupta, Gupta V, right? Once I was giving an examination where there were 36 Vishal Guptas in one room. So you need to ensure that that the indexing platform correctly identifies you. Some of you may have queries that, I have published 5 documents, but I can only see 4 on Scopus. Where is the 5th document? That may be because of 2 reasons. One is that journal is not Scopus indexed, but there is a second reason that article is there on Scopus, but it is indexed wrongly under somebody else's name. That is because Scopus was not able to identify if V Gupta and Vishal Gupta are the same person, right? So if you have an ORC ID, you have a unique ID, which ensures that you have a common ID where all the articles are tagged. So next time when you submit an article, please submit your ORC ID along with that article. So to summarize, basically, we've already discussed about thinking before writing, choosing the right journal and article type, using the right process to write a paper, ensuring that the language is up to date, ensuring that the paper is up to date and in the right context, using the correct article structure, understanding researcher, editor and reviewer questions and preparing accordingly, writing a good cover letter, and then revising everything and reviewing all the comments received by the editors and reviewers and rephrasing your article accordingly, obeying publication ethics, and then promoting your own article. With this, I would like to introduce you to the Elsevier Researcher Academy. Now, this is really important for all of you, for young researchers, senior scientists, reviewers, editors. I think this is a one-stop shop where you can actually get all useful information related to research at no extra cost. So to help you save time and achieve your objectives as you continue to work from home, Elsevier has launched the Elsevier Researcher Academy, which is free to use for all the researchers. We recognize that continuous learning is an essential part of this journey, and we would like you to help you navigate your research journey accordingly. This platform offers certificates and rewards as you progress through different modules. On Researcher Academy, you will find e-learning modules developed by global experts, career guidance, and latest news from the global research community. The link that you see online, which is researcheracademy.elsevier.com, this is the link that you need to access the platform, or simply type Elsevier Researcher Academy on Google. There are interesting courses. I have highlighted a few on your screen, which you can see. For example, there is a certified peer reviewer course, right? Where young authors and faculty can take this course and become Elsevier certified. There are courses on how to find the right journal, how to write a good book, finding jobs, fundamentals of article writing, career guidance, writing skills, technical writing skills. So if you want to go the next level in how to write articles that we have learned today, you can go with the technical writing skills. And then also you can get a course on publication ethics and much, much more. So we recommend all of you to visit this website and get insights on the entire research workflow. So with this, we come to the end of the first session. And now I will take up a few questions that have been posted in the Q&A box. Post that, we will go on a break at 12:45 for half an hour, and we come back at 1:15 to start with the next session on Mendeley, right? So I'll take up a few questions now. My friend Pranav is here to help me out. So Pranav, have you noted a few questions that are to be answered?
Hi Vishal, and thank you all for attending this session. Can you hear me okay, Vishal?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, so most of the questions which we have received in the first session, Vishal, is related to acknowledgement in terms of they will get the certificate or not. So most of the questions are that. So will you be able to take that question and let them know that what's our policy to provide them the certificate after this seminar?
Right. So just to let for everyone's information, currently we for this session we do not have certificates, but as I explained you can go to this Researcher Academy and you can take up specific courses. They are very short courses, right? You know, half an hour course or a 15-minute, 20-minute course. You can take up these courses and you can get direct certificates from this platform. That is why I introduced you to this platform, because you can learn as well as get certificates as you proceed in your learning graph.
All right. Second most asked question, Vishal, was will they be able to get the recording or the PPT or PDF of the session which we're having today? So right. Probably most of them want to understand whether it will be possible or not.
Right. So we will send the webinar recording along with the PPT to all of you on the email IDs that you have provided to us when you logged on to this platform. We will send those information to all of you directly.
All right, Vishal, and another question which is very important, I think, from researcher point of view, and probably you will be covering that in the session which you'll have for Scopus. And that question is how to have an ORCID. I think it will be taken up by you in our Scopus session, but if you want to give an introduction on that.
Yeah. So basically ORCID ID is a free to create ID, and it's a third party ID that you can create online. You simply go online, type ORCID, right? You can go to their platform and you can create an ID. Once you do that, you can go back to Scopus. So if any one of you have published even one article in a Scopus Index journal, your ID will be created on Scopus automatically. So when you go to Scopus, you go to your ID, which all of you can do, irrespective of the fact that whether you have subscription or not. You go to your platform, the Scopus platform, find your name, and then you can tag your Scopus ID with your ORC ID. So that will ensure that all your articles that have been published in Scopus Index journal are covered under your name specifically, right?
All right. Yeah. So how much time do we have to answer these questions, Vishal? Just to be able to sort out some important questions from the forum.
Yeah. So we have 10 minutes approximately.
All right. So we still have some time. So one very important question, what I can see here is Research Academy courses are free or paid?
Okay. So the Researcher Academy courses are free to take, right? You can go onto this platform. It is for free, freely accessible. There are a lot of e-modules, lot of courses that you can take, along with lot of webinar recordings and a lot of information, supplementary information that all of you might need. So I have received a lot of very specific questions like, how do I design my research? How do I start with my literature review? And so many questions that I have received. And that is why, I must tell you, all the answers to your questions are on the Elsevier Researcher Academy. If you go to this platform, you have a feel of this platform, you can get so much information. And while we all are working from home, I think this is a correct time where you can step back, take a pause, learn, and come out as a much knowledgeable person from this particular tab.